I guess I'm on. We haven't quite coordinated the introduction piece, so I don't want to exclude you getting the introduction you deserve. You don't know the story, all of you. Some of you have had some introduction to it, but Dean is Chuck's brother. It's always been Chuck's brother, just didn't know it. Because of some adoption issues and other things took place, God chose to work in a little bit different paths here within the last year or two. Through some circumstances, they have come into one another's lives. And so it's been thrilling for the Larson family to find this new person that's a part of the family. But as kind of in some ways a side note, to me it's almost, though it could be the main story. They've also become aware of some extraordinary things that God has been doing in Dean's life. And I'm not going to tell your story, don't worry. I will say this, that God has taken an individual, much like you and I, and worked in some remarkable ways. And so, as a result of that, Dean has got to know the other gentleman who will be introduced to us and who we've already met this morning. But Dean is the one that's kind of coordinated all of this, has made it possible for all of these gentlemen to be here this morning. And Dean, we just want to say welcome, as well as to you gentlemen as well, for sharing with us this morning. And now I will be quiet and let you start.
Thank you very much, Pastor. I spent a lot of time trying to prepare for what I was going to say today, and now I'm going to change. And for those of you who have been watching me on here beside me, you know how much courage that takes. But let me just start with the story. Okay, because I was adopted at the age of 3 months. And God watched over me, and he kept me safe, and he blessed me. But this story with my brother Chuck is an extraordinary one. And I know at the age of 40, I wrote a letter to my biological mother. And I started praying over it. And I prayed for 10 years about when would be the right time to send it. And I was getting close to 50, and my motives weren't, maybe they were a bit selfish. They weren't all that pure. I just basically started to do the math, and I realized that about 50, and I knew she was about 20, and I started to worry that if I didn't do a search, and I didn't do it soon, that maybe I would miss the opportunity because she would pass away. And so finally, I felt like I got some confirmation from God that the time was right as I was moving close to my 50th birthday. I sent the letter off, I went through the agency that I needed to do it, and I didn't hear from anyone for many months. And then one day I got the call. My mother had been found. I got on the phone with her. It wasn't too much longer than that. I got on the phone with her, and she talked to me, and we did a little chit-chatting, but then finally she said to me, you know, Dean, I've got some good news, and I've got some bad news for you. I had said in my letter that, you know, I hoped to maybe get some information about who my father was. And one of the first things she said is that he'd been dead for close to 20 years. But she also told me that after she put me up for adoption, that about 3 or 4 years after that, she got back together with my father. And they got married. And she told me that day that I had 2 full biological brothers that I didn't know anything about. And it wasn't long before she said, give me a few days, let me tell them, and I'll get back to you. And she got back with me within a couple of days, and before I knew it, she said, we're coming to visit you in Wisconsin. Both me and Chuck and Clint, we want to see you. And it was at that time that they came, and I got to hug her, and I got to hug my brothers, and I got to know them, and it was a blessed time. And that was a year ago, September, that I got to meet them for the first time. And it was a wonderful experience. And things have been just incredible and blessed. And I told Chuck and Clint about this ministry I was involved with in South Africa, and they said, we want to go, can we come? And all of a sudden, these brothers I hadn't met for 50 years of my life said, I want to be with you in this God thing. I want to see what's going on in South Africa. And they came, and they loved it, and they said to me, you know what, I know that you have this friend Brendan who's doing a tour right now with musicians. I just want my church in Salem to be able to know a little bit about the things that I discovered in South Africa. Can you come? And there just wasn't any way that we could say no. I do want you to know that the blessings have been amazing because we did have a family reunion. I'm going to take some risks here and embarrass my mother just a little bit. But some of you can understand the joy that I had this year because we decided to have a family reunion at the house. We had all the family there. The biological relatives from Oregon and California and my adopted relatives all came together to love each other. But it was also at that night that my mother, after those 50 years too, came to me and Chuck in the middle of a rainstorm, and she said, I just want to be with you guys forever in heaven. And can you tell me how to say this prayer so that I can be part of all of this? And so, together, we've had blessings beyond anything we can imagine. And so the story tonight is to talk about how God can use all the things in life, and all the people in life, and all of our mistakes, and all the things that can happen, all of the screw-ups, and that He has the power to be able to use those things in our lives in ways that we could never imagine. Now, I'm here today to introduce this ministry and to tell God's story about how He brought us together. But I do want you to know that each of us, all four of us, and five because we're counting Chuck now, but every one of us, at one point in our life, has been told that we're not good enough for God. Now, maybe that we were good enough for His grace and good enough for His salvation, but certainly that we weren't good enough to do the really hard work, the really important work, the work that has eternal value. That was saved for people that were much more special, that had better college degrees, but it certainly wasn't for people like us. And so the message that we have today, the message that we hope to encourage the people here with, is that if there has been anybody in this church that ever been told that they're not good enough, or maybe even tell themselves that they're not good enough for the important stuff, the things that really matter, kingdom stuff, God stuff, if there's anybody that's wondered about that, we're here to encourage you today. We're here to tell the story. A story that we hope will give you courage to not only want to do the work that really matters, the work that has eternal importance, but we want you to seek out that mission that God has for your life. And we're not in any way going to tell you you're as bad as us. But the message is that if God can use people like us, He could certainly use you. I met, a little over 10 years ago, I met Brendan Adams. I was on my knees at the altar of our church. And it had been a while, and as a youth, I'd gotten lost in a lot of things that were pretty crazy. It was the 70s and 80s, and I'd gotten lost in a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I turned to God on my knees, and I'd asked for His salvation. And He was faithful. But in some kinds of ways, there was a lot of ways I could have turned to Him more than I did, because what I ended up doing was I turned to some things that we think are pretty important, but they weren't really God. And on that day, on my knees, I went and I got the college degree, that I'd always wanted. I had worried about it, 10 years earlier than that. I worried about it because I watched my best friend die, living that lifestyle, and God pulled me out of it, and He sent me to college, and I got the college degree I always wanted, and I went on and I got the job that I'd always dreamed about, and I got the sports car that I'd always believed that if I really could have that sports car, things would be really cool and life would be great. And you know what I had? I had a beautiful trophy girlfriend. It was just awesome.